Somewhere on a message board, someone always asks the same question. Could a hacker, a government, or a solar flare simply switch off the internet? There is no single switch to flip. The network is built from thousands of independently owned pieces scattered across the planet. The internet is not a machine anyone owns. It is close to 70,000 separate networks, run by companies and governments, that agree to pass each other's traffic on nothing more than mutual trust. That trust is why modern life leans on connections most people never see. Traffic lights report to city servers, hospital records live in remote data centers, and some gas pumps confirm payment online before releasing a single drop of fuel. More than 5 billion people now use the internet, and by some estimates, over 100 billion devices quietly exchange data every day, from thermostats to shipping containers. The network was born from a Cold War fear that a single knockout blow could sever communication across a country. Engineer Paul Barron designed packet switching in the 1960s so data could reroute itself around damage, with no central point to destroy. That design worked. Today, the internet is a web of independently owned networks called autonomous systems, each deciding for itself who to trust and which routes to advertise to the rest of the world. That trust has already misfired in public. In 2008, Pakistan Telecom tried to block YouTube inside its own borders and instead accidentally announced itself as the fastest route to YouTube for the entire planet. Global traffic to the site vanished for about 2 hours. Long before that mistake, in November 1988, a graduate student named Robert Morris released a self-replicating program that accidentally crippled roughly 10% of the roughly 60,000 computers then connected to the early internet, freezing university and military systems for days. Almost none of that traffic travels by satellite. Roughly 99% of intercontinental data crosses the ocean floor through fiber optic cables, around 500 of them, thinner than a garden hose, stretching more than 1 million kilometers combined. When one snaps, and fishing trawlers and ship anchors cause most of the damage, the world's fleet of repair ships is startlingly small. Fewer than 60 specialized vessels service the entire planet, and a single deep-sea repair can take 2 to 4 weeks. In 2022, an undersea volcanic eruption near Tonga severed the one cable connecting that island nation to the rest of the internet. It took more than a month to fully restore service, even with global attention and emergency funding. In February 2024, 3 undersea cables in the Red Sea were severed within days of each other, cutting capacity between Asia, Africa, and Europe by roughly a quarter. Investigators pointed to an anchor dragged by a cargo ship that had been abandoned after a missile strike in the same shipping lane. Ownership of those cables has quietly shifted too. 4 American technology companies, Google, Meta, Amazon, and Microsoft, now own or lease more than half of the undersea cable capacity added in the last decade. A single company named Cloudflare, built to protect websites from attacks, now sits between roughly 1 and 5 websites and the visitors trying to reach them. When its system stumbled in 2019 and again in 2023, huge parts of the web appeared to vanish at once. In 2013, a routine internal error took Google's services offline for roughly 5 minutes, and by some measurements, global internet traffic dropped by around 40% during those 5 minutes alone, a glimpse of just how much of the web quietly depends on a handful of companies. Picture 3 ordinary failures stacking up inside a single day instead of unfolding months apart. This exact combination has never occurred. It is speculation built from incidents that have each already happened separately in isolation. First, 2 of the busiest cable corridors on Earth go dark within hours of each other, echoing a real 2008 incident near Alexandria, when anchor damage cut internet access across Egypt, India, and the Gulf for days. Second, a single network operator makes the same kind of mistake Meta made in October 2021, when it accidentally withdrew its own routing announcements and vanished from the internet's map for 6 hours, taking billions of messages with it. That routing system, called BGP, runs on trust rather than verification, so one bad announcement can send massive amounts of traffic to the wrong place within minutes. Third, the 13 root server addresses that translate web names into numbers come under sudden strain, the way Dyn servers did in October 2016, when over 100,000 hijack cameras and routers flooded them with fake requests. 3 failures, all inside the same 24 hours, 2 severed cables, 1 routing mistake, and a flood of fake requests overwhelming the root servers. Monitoring dashboards at every major carrier would light up within minutes of each other. The first sign is mundane. A video call freezes mid-sentence. A weather app spins and never loads. Within minutes, social feeds stop refreshing, and millions of people do the same thing. They refresh again, certain it is only their own connection. Cloud platforms that quietly run half the internet's back office begin failing in cascade. A single misconfiguration at Fastly did this once before in June 2021. Amazon, Reddit, and the United Kingdom government's website all went dark for about an hour. A preview of a different kind arrived in July 2024 when a single flawed software update from the cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike crashed millions of Windows computers worldwide within hours, grounding flights at major airlines and forcing some hospitals back onto paper charts before the day was over. Voice calls falter next. Most mobile carriers now route conversations over internet protocols rather than the old analog switches. So a broken backbone would not just kill browsing, it could silence phone calls too. One thing keeps working, and it surprises almost everyone: GPS. Satellite positioning has nothing to do with the internet, so cars, ships, and phones would still know exactly where they were, even while unable to tell anyone else. Streaming services, smart speakers, and video doorbells fall silent almost immediately because nearly all of them depend on a distant cloud server to function at all, even for something as simple as turning on a light. At the checkout counter, the failure is instant and visceral. Card terminals dial out to verify every transaction online, so within seconds, the machine that processes 1 million invisible approvals a day simply stops answering. This already happened at national scale. When Sudan's government cut internet access during protests in June 2019, automated teller machines stopped dispensing cash and banks closed their doors within hours, unable to verify a single balance. Some retailers still keep a cash float for exactly this reason, but a growing number of modern stores no longer keep registers or safes capable of making change without a network connection. Stock markets do not simply pause gracefully. The New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ both run on electronic order matching systems that depend on continuous network links between exchanges, brokers, and clearing houses around the world. So a full day offline would freeze trillions of dollars in daily trading volume and force markets into manual circuit breaker procedures that have not been seriously tested since long before algorithms took over most trades. Even cash has quietly become a networked idea. Payroll deposits, tax payments, and interbank transfers all move through systems like the Federal Reserve's wire network, meaning a bank could be solvent and still unable to prove it to anyone. Online retail, worth more than $6 trillion a year globally, would freeze mid-transaction. Shopping carts would sit abandoned, warehouse robots would idle, and delivery drivers would refresh apps that simply would not load. Inside houses, the outage turns oddly domestic. Smart locks that check a cloud server before opening can strand people outside their own front doors, a design that puts an internet connection between a person and a key. Factories that rely on internet-connected sensors to track temperature, pressure, and assembly line timing face a hard choice: halt production entirely or fall back on paper checklists that many younger workers have never actually used. Aviation, built on Cold War-era redundancy, turns out to be one of the steadiest systems in this scenario. radar, radio communication, and onboard navigation were designed to function without the internet because most of that infrastructure predates it entirely. But the paperwork around flying is thoroughly modern. Airline booking systems, gate assignments, and crew scheduling software mostly live in the cloud, so planes already airborne would likely keep flying safely while departures backed up on the ground for hours. Ocean shipping faces a similar split. Ships already at sea navigate independently of the internet, but the ports waiting for them do not. Modern container terminals coordinate crane movements and customs clearance through internet-linked logistics platforms, and that same just-in-time coordination keeps grocery shelves stocked, moving goods constantly between warehouses, trucking companies, and retailers. A single day offline would not empty the shelves, but it would quietly stall the trucks meant to refill them tomorrow. Freight railways increasingly rely on internet-connected signaling meant to prevent collisions. Wherever older mechanical signals still exist, they would suddenly become the safest option on the line. Electronic health records, often stored on remote servers to cut costs, can become instantly unreachable, forcing doctors and nurses back onto paper charts in the middle of shift. This is not hypothetical. During the NotPetya cyber attack in 2017, hospitals across the United Kingdom and United States lost access to patient records for days and had to cancel surgeries, reverting entirely to pen and paper. Emergency dispatch has quietly modernized too. Many emergency call centers now route through voice over internet protocol systems, meaning the very lifeline meant to work when everything else fails could itself become vulnerable. Power grids offer some reassurance. Decades ago, engineers built many grid control systems, called SCADA networks, as closed loops cut off from the internet on purpose, long before an outage like this one became a real worry. Water treatment plants are less consistent. Some still use internet-linked monitoring for chemical dosing and pressure control, meaning a prolonged outage could force operators to run critical safety checks by hand, the way their predecessors once did. Everything described so far, the severed cables, the routing mistake, the flooded root servers, was accidental. Here is the twist. Engineers agree that knocking out the entire global internet at once, everywhere, by pure accident, has never realistically been possible, while deliberately switching off one country's access is not only possible, it happens routinely. Egypt offers the clearest case study. On January 27, 2011, as protests against President Hosni Mubarak grew, the government ordered internet providers to cut access. Within hours, roughly 93% of the country's networks went dark. Engineers did not flip one distant master switch. They physically visited internet exchange points and telecom offices, one at a time, ordering technicians to withdraw their routes manually, taking the country offline company by company. The shutdown lasted 5 days, and researchers later estimated it cost Egypt's economy at least $90 million, hitting tourism, outsourcing firms, and stock trading hardest, all while failing to stop the protests it was meant to suppress. Egyptians did not stay silent for those 5 days. Google and Twitter engineers built a tool called Speak to Tweet within 48 hours, letting people dial an international phone number and leave a voicemail that was automatically posted online as text. Myanmar's military did something similar after seizing power in February 2021, ordering nationwide blackouts that crippled banking and left automated teller machines empty. Iran cut off internet access nationwide for roughly a week in November 2019 during fuel price protests, and Kazakhstan repeated the pattern in January 2022. No country has done this more often than India. Authorities in the region of Jammu and Kashmir shut down internet access for more than 500 days between 2019 and 2021, the longest blackout ever imposed by democracy. Access Now, a digital rights group that tracks these events through its Keep It On campaign, documented over 100 such deliberate government shutdowns worldwide in 2022 alone, more than double the number recorded 5 years earlier. Deliberate disruption is not limited to full national blackouts, either. In late 2023 and again in 2024, undersea cables and a gas pipeline beneath the Baltic Sea were severed within days of one another, and investigators traced the damage to commercial ships that had dragged their anchors for miles along the seabed. It was the same kind of damage seen months earlier in the Red Sea, but this time in the heart of Europe, and several governments in the region opened sabotage investigations, unable to rule out that the anchors had been dropped on purpose. Against that backdrop of deliberate shutdowns and suspected sabotage, some backups the internet age never fully erased still stand ready. Amateur radio operators, still numbering in the millions worldwide, maintain equipment specifically designed to keep working when every modern network fails, and many train for this scenario every single year. Print newspapers dismissed for years as obsolete would suddenly matter again. A printing press needs only paper, ink, and a truck to run, no network connection at all. Landline telephone networks, where they still exist, run on old analog circuit switching that never depended on internet protocols, and many countries have quietly decommissioned those copper lines even so. During mass protests in Hong Kong in 2019, hundreds of thousands of people downloaded a messaging app called Bridgeify, which passes messages phone to phone over Bluetooth in a mesh, needing no cell tower or internet connection at all. Satellite internet has added a newer backup layer since these historical shutdowns. When Russia's invasion damaged Ukraine's ground infrastructure in 2022, thousands of Starlink terminals kept hospitals, banks, and soldiers connected from orbit, sidestepping the cut cables entirely. And somewhere on the ocean, one of those same handful of specialized cable repair ships would already be moving, because in a scenario built on real precedent, the crews who fix the internet's backbone rarely wait for instructions to start looking. Recovery would not arrive as a single moment. It would arrive as thousands of small decisions made almost simultaneously, each network operator on Earth independently deciding the coast was clear and switching its routes back on. Border Gateway Protocol has no restart button. Instead, networks re-announce their routes to their neighbors, who pass that information onward, and the entire map of the internet slowly reassembles itself over minutes to hours, the same way it broke. Domain name lookups follow their own timeline. Cached addresses expire on a schedule called time to live, so some websites would reappear for users almost instantly, while others stayed stubbornly unreachable for hours, seemingly at random. When Meta's own outage hit in October 2021, engineers reportedly could not immediately reach the affected equipment, because the very systems used to badge into the data center also depended on the internal network that had just failed. They eventually resorted to physically cutting through security barriers to reach the servers, and the outage stretched on for roughly 6 hours before service returned. In parts of Nigeria, India, and Brazil, small merchants run their entire storefront through WhatsApp, taking orders and payments in chat messages instead of a website. When Meta's platforms went dark for 6 hours in 2021, many of those sellers had no way to process a single sale until service returned. Economists who model scenarios like this one generally agree the cost would not be spread evenly. Wealthy, digitally dependent economies would likely lose more money per hour than developing regions where cash and paper records never fully disappeared. Small businesses that built their entire operation around online ordering, digital payment, and cloud accounting would suffer disproportionately, some of them permanently, even after service returned the very next morning. By evening of this hypothetical day, most services would be limping back online. Full normalcy might take another 24 to 48 hours, as caches refresh, routes stabilize, and the last stubborn corners of the network catch up. Paul Barron sketched the first diagrams of packet switching in 1964 during the height of the Cold War, more than 60 years before this hypothetical Tuesday. Somewhere tonight, a repair ship idles near a coastline, a ham radio operator checks a spare battery, and a printing press stands ready in the dark. Its vulnerability was never a switch. It was always the humans standing next to one.